Welcome to the Centurion 360 podcast with PR marketing and crisis management expert Michael Bilello.
And welcome to the Centurion 360 podcast. I am your host, Michael Bilello. You can check us out on Twitter at Centurion 360. My personal Twitter handle is Bilello PR. You can also send us an email to suggest a topic or a guest. Info at centurion-strategies.com. For those of you enjoying the video element, you'll notice a different background. We are in our Arlington hideout just outside of Washington, D.C., and this is always a great town to obviously visit. The museums continue to get better. Hats off to National Mall Parks and Services because they continue to improve the experience there for everyone who visits. And it's good to be in D.C. and Virginia, not only establishing new business, a new office, but also connecting with some old friends and meeting some new ones as well. So I'm always happy to be in the D.C. area. The art of the interview is today's subject. We're going to be talking about that. It's important to me because as a PR professional, obviously a lot of what we do is we prepare clients for interviews. That's a good percentage of what goes into an effective campaign. If you can't execute good interviews, then you can't execute a good campaign. And the return on the investment for both the agency, which is where I'm sort of concerned, as well as the return on the investment for the client, it's never there. So what makes a good interview? Is everything really on the record? Can you say something's off the record? What's the dynamic that has to be established between the subject and the person conducting the interview? And so our guest to discuss that will be Debbie Emery. And Debbie Emery is a news editor for The Wrap. They cover Hollywood, sports and entertainment. Debbie's also a sports and entertainment journalist and blogger. And I think Debbie has a great deal of experience when conducting interviews, and it could perhaps shed some light on that. Some of the things that I'll bring up during the conversation will be when I have sort of two mindsets. When it's proactive and positive public relations, I know going into the interview, I have the ability to shape, as we call it, what those questions are going to be. But when I'm operating out of a crisis management position, I know and have to anticipate that I can't really shape any of the questions being asked. And it's very important for me to translate that to the client because more often than not, clients think that because you're a crisis manager, that you're able to get certain questions not to be asked by the media. And that's furthest from the truth. That typically comes from lawyers who are giving advice to clients about what to do in a crisis. But from a PR perspective, we have to know that nothing is off the record. Anything and everything can be asked. We have to be prepared for all questions, and we have to be prepared and make sure our client's prepared to deliver complete answers. And hopefully through that interaction, the interview, and in this case, the art of the interview will transpire. The media gets what they want. We hopefully get what we need, and a story is produced. And then there's a whole different element to that, whereas you, the viewer, consumes it, you talk about it on social media, and that's what the game changer's been in crisis management and in PR in general, is that people on social media are going to be very honest, brutally honest. And so to go on a mainstream news program and in a crisis management scenario, or even in a positive PR scenario, think that you're going to shape certain questions, not answer certain questions, not be truthful, honest, is a complete mistake because you're going to get called out on social media. And then the next interview you do will pull from social media, and it'll make the next interview that much more difficult. So I hope to provide some insight for those of you in the PR marketing business, those of you who are just innocent bystanders and all this, on sort of the different process, different mindset, different thoughts that go into this. So obviously you're going to have my perspective as a PR marketing crisis management professional. You're going to hear from Debbie from a media and journalist standpoint and perspective. And I think when we hash this whole thing out, what you're going to learn is that it's really a give and take relationship. I've had clients in crisis management scenarios who are, I can't give away details, names, phone numbers, birth dates. That would be unprofessional, although some of my contemporaries do find it necessary to spill clients' baggage, if you will, for their own media enjoyment. I don't do that. We don't do that at Centurion. But I had someone who I began working with, an investor had invested a large amount of money in a project that this client was this celebrity was a brand ambassador for. There may or may not have been sex tapes that recently had come out, and this is the person's first interaction with the media since that sex tape. And they immediately thought that my role was to make sure that no one asked about the obvious. And what I tried to tell them, as well as any client in this capacity, is we have to be prepared for that question to be asked. Not only asked, but asked first and asked often. And we have to be able to answer it. And if you fail to do that, it's not going to be a good interview. And then on social media, it's going to get picked up. It's going to go, as they say, viral, and it's going to get a lot worse. So it's always best to be honest, to understand that those questions are going to get asked, be prepared to answer them, and move on. That's from a crisis management scenario. And it's never easy. It causes some contempt between you and the client sometimes, but you have to be honest. And in this one particular case, this person was like my hero growing up. So to see him in that state at the time, and then to have constant confrontation about how interviews should be conducted and trying to correct his understanding and perception of the entire management process was a bit disheartening, and further contributes to me being a jaded individual. But anyway, we're going to be connecting with Debbie now, and out of Los Angeles. So again, I hope you enjoy the art of the interview with Debbie Emery. Debbie, thank you for joining the Centurion 360 podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be talking to you today.
Yeah, likewise. And you filed a story today with The Wrap on Deflate-gate.
Yep. One of my least favorite stories of the year, definitely, being a Patriots fan. But we have to come out and look at it unbiased and balance all the arguments.
Yeah, it's always a tough role as a journalist. And that's sort of what I wanted to talk to you about today is the art of the interview, because we have different, even though we're in the same industry, we always have different perspectives and different roles to play. So your role as a journalist is to interview the subject, to ask all the right questions, and then obviously effectively communicate that to an audience. And then our job as public relations, marketing, and crisis management professionals is to help conduct the interview, facilitate the interview, making sure that the subject, which more often than not is our client, is properly prepared, understands what's going to be asked, understands how to answer the question in an effective manner. Perhaps there's some messaging in there and some key points. But then also, like Deflate-gate, there's crisis management scenarios where I, as a crisis manager, I'm trying to anticipate what you're going to ask and then prepare the client to be comfortable with those questions. And all of this has to do with, I guess, what we'll talk about today, right? The art of the interview. My question to you is, what makes a good interview in your experience?
The basis of every good interview, whether you are the interviewer or the interviewee, is doing your homework and research. And sometimes it has to be done very quickly on the fly. News pops up, you don't know what scenario you're going to be put into, but you can't go into any conversation blindly.
Right.
And I think a lot of journalists just don't do that and don't do their homework before they do the interview.
Yeah, and there's probably no quicker way to make your subject more uncomfortable than asking a question that isn't accurate or getting information that's wrong, right?
Yeah, it makes them uncomfortable and it makes you look unprepared and stupid, basically, and you're not going to get the best out of them.
Right.
I mean, there's so many different types of interviews and so many different scenarios, and the agenda is always changing. But no matter what the situation is, you have to do your homework.
Yeah. So how do you get to a point in your career where you're comfortable? Are you ever comfortable asking those uncomfortable questions?
I don't think you're ever truly comfortable with it. Nobody enjoys asking difficult questions, especially when the subject that you are talking to is the topic of the question. I mean, if you're asking an expert about, what they think of Deflate-gate, then that's, it's more impartial. If you're asking Tom Brady or if you're asking Bill Belichick, then that's a lot scarier.
Yeah, no,
and I
can
have
only
to say
imagine.
One of my scariest interviews, which was not even about a tricky subject, was with Bill Belichick.
Bill Belichick.
I don't want to be the person that first asked him about this this punishment.
Really? Yeah, he's been someone who obviously, and some people think it's effective, but he's not an easy interview. And some people think that he's purposely does that so the media doesn't want to interview him. Is that an effective tactic? Is that how he makes you feel?
I think that's just his personality. And he isn't going to open up about anything, and he isn't going to tell the press anything that he doesn't need them to know. So you ask him, did Tom Brady deflate the footballs? You'll probably get pretty much the same answer that if you ask him what he had for breakfast. Like, no question is easy with Belichick. And in this scenario, I mean, he's not even talking to the press, and he shouldn't.
Yeah.
It's down to the team owner, and this is not about the coach at this point.
Right. Yeah, that's always interesting. And, you know, as a public relations professional, when I'm preparing the client, you've got some clients who are open to some coaching. They'll take some feedback, and they'll try to facilitate a good interview with the media. But whenever it's charged like it is right now, where you're coming from a negative situation, the media is asking these questions that, again, are uncomfortable. They aren't easy to answer. Some of them are leading. There are legal ramifications for it. It's never an easy scenario. Before we joined you, I was telling a very brief anecdotal story without specifics to respect the client's identity. But I had a client that I was hired on to. There was an investor who was investing a large amount of money in a project, and this particular celebrity was the brand ambassador. And this particular celebrity also had a sex tape that had recently come to light. And
sounds good.
Yeah, and I was to help facilitate his first media interaction since the sex tape. And so the first thing they thought by signing, the contract with me was that I would get people like you not to ask the obvious. But I try to explain to them that not only will it be asked early and often, and we have to be prepared to answer it, but by not being truthful about the answer, by not engaging that question, you are going to start a social media storm, and things will go, as I said earlier, viral. Social media really is the court of public opinion. It's keeping people much more honest, and it's a game changer. It's a delta in crisis management, whether it's Cosby or anybody. How has social media helped you, but also made interviews more difficult, to where perhaps in the past you wouldn't have to ask a question, but if you're not asking that question, social media, they're going to remind you, hey, Debbie, how could you not have asked that question?
Yeah, I mean, it tells you what the readers are thinking and what they're interested in, which does help guide your direction of the interview. It's like, I may be very interested in one aspect of someone's life or their story or what's going on, but the general public or the fans are really obsessed with something else. So you can't just ignore that. You also can't let it completely direct your interview. Right. It's like Twitter does not guide how I do my job. It assists it and educates me more, but it doesn't tell me what to do.
Yeah. But it's definitely a good sounding board. I think it keeps both of us on both sides, you as a journalist, me as a PR professional, honest. We have to be honest about what's being asked, what's going to be answered, and really how truthful it is. Because when it doesn't sound truthful, it doesn't sound honest, they will quickly remind you on Twitter that you're not being honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this isn't really to do with just Twitter, but I think Tom Brady's interview with Jim Gray last week, when there was obviously the elephant in the room and Brady didn't address it, that didn't do him any favors. Like, people just went crazy about it afterwards. Yeah, it was like they didn't like his response, and he wasn't talking about it honestly.
Yeah, I agree. And we saw the same thing with Cosby. In fact, it was probably a little bit worse with Cosby, to where
a lot worse.
Yeah, a lot worse. Not only subject matter wise, but just his actions. But remember when he was looking to coerce and coach the media. Let's not ask this question. And they were actually still recording him, and he had apparently no idea that they were recording him. That this doesn't play well. And I've always said that if you're not willing to ask or answer the questions, then just don't do the interviews. Don't engage the media. Either engage them 100% or don't engage them at all. We also saw something with Robert Downey Jr. recently, right, during the promotion of his movie, where he got up and walked away from an interview. And I thought, whenever I see this in any crisis management scenario, to where he's managing a crisis that's affiliated with his brand, which he was a substance abuser, was an addict for some time, but I feel like he should have that so well managed by now that he would be able to turn any question about that subject into a positive by touting the importance of sobriety and how it's been positive and how his life is much more productive and fruitful. I often get frustrated when I see them fumble on things and walk out of interviews when they're not prepared to answer a question that they've been asked for 20 years. What's your take on that?
I think maybe with Downey Jr., he was just sick of answering it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's been 20 years. It's in the past. And I know his son's had some issues with substance abuse more recently, so it could be a bit more of a sensitive family topic because of that.
Right.
That's one of those situations where I think he got away with it. Like, it turned into a viral video, everyone watched it, but people were laughing.
Right.
It's like Robert Downey Jr. is the only person that can wake up in a stranger's bed in Malibu, and still he kind of like, it turns into almost a light thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
he's
very
like him.
Yeah, he's very likable. That's the whole thing. Is he's very likable. So it was very frustrating for me, obviously, as a fan. He's not a client, but as a fan, just to not see him handle it properly. And that's the thing too. Is if you don't want the question asked, then just don't do the media. Have you had any recent awkward interview experiences? You don't have to name names, but what have you learned from that as a journalist, and what can we learn as people, either interviewed or preparing people to be interviewed?
I haven't had anything recent, thankfully. When I did used to do a lot of red carpet interviews and a lot of celebrity interviews, things would get a lot more awkward a lot faster then, because you're on a red carpet and you have your agenda and they have their agenda, and often they are nothing in common. I remember once doing a joint interview with about 5 reporters with Nicole Kidman at the Cold Mountain premiere, and I had to ask her if she was dating Lenny Kravitz, which she was. But she just shut me down and walked off. And then you're surrounded by 6 other people who just got shut off too. So it's one thing upsetting the celebrity. The other thing is selecting like the rest of the press. It's really embarrassing.
Yeah. And red carpets, I've worked plenty of them. You've worked plenty of them. That's really fast paced. I'm always very impressed with members of the media, how there could be 100 celebrities coming down. And it's very important to know just enough about each to where you're asking the appropriate questions. That's got to be a challenge.
Yeah, it's very, very fast paced. You're standing around for 2 hours and then you've got 10 minutes of just action and mayhem. And quite often not the people that you're expecting to come.
Right.
So if you're at an awards show or a movie, like the big stars will be there, but then there's a bunch of other stars that you didn't know were coming, and you have to act like you know exactly the right questions to ask them.
Yeah.
You can tell people who are inexperienced when they just blow off an actor or rude to them, or just because they don't have anything relevant to ask, they like pass them. And it's a very fine balance of being courteous and respectful of like these people's talents as well.
Yeah.
I was at an event recently with Maria Shriver for Special Olympics, and they brought some of the Special Olympics athletes down the red carpet and asked a bunch of reporters if they wanted to ask some questions. And they said no, like, we're not interested, we just want to speak to the stars. I'm like, this is what the crux of this event is, and the program and the games. I'm like, even if you're not going to include it in your story, do the interview. This will make those kids' day.
Yeah.
A year.
And there's some interesting personal profile stories there as well, to think about what these athletes have overcome, continue to overcome.
Yeah, it's just so much more of a deeper level. So there are so many different types of interviews. If you're doing a scrum with 30 different reporters, if you're doing a one-on-one, if you have like 1 minute to get the crux of a story and one specific question, or if you have 2 hours to spend with somebody.
Yeah.
So there's many, many different layers and skills to look.
The Hollywood Press Corps, and I see it here in DC as well, the Hollywood Press Corps, I think, goes to so many events and galas and charitable events and galas that they start to forget about the charitable aspect, and it's just another place for celebrities to be interviewed. So I think they sometimes miss that. But the good journalists, including yourself, you know that, yes, this is another celebrity gala, but it's for XYZ, and I have to make sure to also intertwine that into my story.
And if you're doing something like that, pick the celebrities that do have a vested interest in this. If it's something they've been through themselves, like Maria Shriver, her whole family has been invested in the Special Olympics her entire life. Not just a celebrity who's like, oh yeah, my publicist sent me here and I don't really know anything about it.
Right.
Then you can get the generic, like, it's a great cause.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah.
and it will mean nothing.
You just said a word, publicist, and I find out when I'm speaking to people, whether it's a prospective client or existing clients or members of the media like yourself, I'm always defending myself against my peers. Publicists get a very bad rap, and I obviously know why that is, but what are some of the do's and don'ts? Obviously, courtesy and respect. You have to have courtesy and respect in this process, right? This interview process. If I agree to engage you, it's an information exchange. I have to make sure that my client is willing and able to exchange information with you. You've got a job to do. We have a job to do, but let's do that in a professional manner. But I feel like publicists sometimes try to manage the situation far too much, don't trust the journalist, and then it just becomes a very tense atmosphere for the subject to operate in. What are some of the do's and don'ts for publicists?
When you're dealing with celebrity publicists, it's a very different animal because they have a lot of pressure on them. It's very fast-paced in Hollywood, and they have a different relationship with the star off the red carpet as they do in front of you. But yeah, just be courteous and polite and treat all the media like human beings and like you are trying to share the same story, not like we're enemies on a battle line.
Right.
Sometimes I feel like you're on a red carpet and it's a journalist on one side and it's a publicist on the other side, and we're just like, it's open warfare.
Yeah.
Which is the worst way to go into it.
Yep. Yeah. And I always feel weird because usually if we're escorting clients down the red carpet, I try to stand behind and out of the line of sight. I'm listening, but I don't want to be seen because I don't want to distract the journalist, or I don't want the journalist to feel as though I don't trust them and I have to eavesdrop on, every question. But it's definitely, I think, about having more human intelligence than anything else. But I've seen some awkward exchanges. They also say nothing is off the record. Have you had any experience where someone, asked you to keep something off the record, but you have an obligation to the story to make the report?
Yeah, I always read that too, but some things are off the record. Some things are given on background, which is the more industry way to say it. Like, we know this, we can report this, we can't say where this came from. And this, I'm talking in the Hollywood trades, I'm talking in hard news. It's different when you were in the tabloids and it's like, it's an insider, it's a source, it's a neighbor. That's a whole different realm that I don't want to get into.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And when you're speaking to the talent or the subject, some things can be off the record. But if it's a recorded one-on-one interview or it's on a red carpet and it's dictated, then no, it's not on the record. It's on it.
Yeah, it makes sense, and that's I think that's reasonable, and I've never had a problem with that. It's always been respected. We've never had any issues with something that we've maybe perhaps shared on background, showing up in a story. I've been very fortunate in that regard, but I also try not to put myself in that situation where I'm sharing information on background because you don't know, and it creates a tension that unless it's necessary, unless there's a purpose to sharing the background, there's really no purpose in doing that. It just creates more problems.
I think you have to be careful when you get in the social atmosphere with either a subject or a person in the media or a celebrity, then things have to be off the record. Like if I'm an award show and then we're hanging out in the bar afterwards, we're having a conversation and it's a group scenario, then things can be completely off the record. I'm not going to, otherwise you're just eavesdropping.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Now you've been in Hollywood for a while now. You've been involved with the media there. And we're seeing sort of a change, if you will, in culture where celebrities are crying out, we have no privacy, we have no space. And you tried, as a journalist, to differentiate yourself from sort of the more aggressive paparazzi out there. At least as an outsider looking in, I see a huge difference between you and quote-unquote paparazzi. But
it's a whole world apart.
Yeah, a whole world apart. But so we've got these celebrities, and most people say, well, you're a public figure, you have to be open to this 100%, and you have to accept that you're not going to have any privacy. That's just the way it goes. What's your opinion on that? What are you seeing out there by way of this culture shift?
I don't agree with that at all. Like, everybody deserves privacy. And in the media realm that I'm in now, like with Hollywood Reporter and The Wrap, um, it's it's Hollywood industry, it's Hollywood news, so it's not as focused on people's personal lives,
Right.
which is very refreshing to me. Having started out in this industry at like In Touch Weekly and worked at Radar Online when it was more intrusive. So I don't want to know what they're doing in their personal lives. I don't want to know who they're dating. It's not interesting to me. It's
Yeah.
their professional lives. It's the way they lead their lives and the core of the actual person. Um, I mean, the world is getting more intrusive. You can't get away from that. But like 20 years ago, there was still paparazzi. There was still tabloid covers. So it's just there's more access now. People have their camera phones. People have social media. Um, but when people let themselves be celebrities, they open the door to that a little bit.
Yeah, they sure do. And I think, obviously you have to respect their privacy. They play a role in society, and society has this insatiable appetite for information on all levels on these folks. They want to know everything about them. Social media, I think, maybe feeds that a little bit. You're able to give people some more information. You're able to share some things that perhaps we weren't privy to previously. I don't know if that feeds the beast. I don't know if social media encourages the paparazzi to be more aggressive, or if it...
I don't think it does. I just think
staves
it
them
makes
off.
it easier and more accessible and cheaper for people.
Yeah. And obviously then the other discussion is, children as well, children of celebrities. LeBron James, in fact, LeBron James' son started getting a lot of attention, and there was a lot of speculation about, and obviously some of it was positive, some of it was a little weird, I thought, but there was just this constant question about who is he, when is he going to go pro, is he going to be committed to someone, and LeBron James stepped back and said, listen, this is my son, he needs to have his a proper upbringing, and we don't need to distract him, we don't need to play to this. And it was kind of neat to see him acting as a dad and telling people to step away.
Beckham got that with his kid too.
Yeah.
With Brooklyn Beckham, but I mean, it worked in his favor. He got picked up by a team. He went through training camp. I think they've dropped him since then, but it can have positive aspects for the children too.
Yeah.
And one thing I have seen change a lot more over the last few years is sports professionals and athletes' personal lives being more in the news. Yeah. Especially with TMZ Sports and even a lot of like the local sports sites. I follow all the Boston news sports, and they're obsessed with the players' personal lives.
Right.
Which is a very interesting development, like I think over the last few years.
Yeah. So obviously asking smart questions is important. You can get some information. In fact, I think if you approach an interview, the art of the interview, if you will, and you start to ask some genuine questions, sometimes celebrities will share more with you about their personal life in that manner than trying to pry it from them. So how do you prepare for a good profile interview? What are you looking for? What are you looking to ask? What's your first go-to question, out of the box?
I don't have a first go-to question because it will be different for every single person.
Okay.
So I think if you had a generic one, then that's the first sign of like you're not doing a good interview.
Right.
It's kind of like the cliche on a red carpet. What are you wearing? I'm like, yeah, this is going to suck from here on out. Unless you're at the Oscars, then just stop.
Right.
As I said, doing your homework, having empathy with them, finding something that is close to their heart and something that they know about, that they really care about, whether it's their favorite sports team, whether it's their hometown, whether it's, their mom had cancer when they were a kid, just something like that deep research that then something you have in common with them. Then you're having a conversation with someone. It's not like question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. It's like the best interview is it feels like you're sitting down and having a chat and a cup of tea and you could talk for hours.
Yeah.
And really being able to relate to them. And it doesn't matter if they just won the Super Bowl or if they may win an Oscar or if they're, someone on the street that was involved in a crime. I mean, not all interviews are with famous people. Some of the hardest interviews are with police officers, are with witnesses, or with third parties. When you're covering news and entertainment and sports, it can be just across the board.
Yeah. Now, if Belichick was one of the harder interviews, per your mention, you're describing, someone who I think is endearing and genuine and is willing to share interesting. It could be anybody. It could be, like you said, a police officer, a celebrity. But who is struck you as a very interesting interview that till this day you still think about that person or think about that interview?
There's been a lot. There's been a lot of celebrities that surprised me too. Like Kate Winslet was one of my favorite interviews. She's so English and proper and just adorable. Angelina Jolie surprised me because I never warmed to her. I thought she'd be very difficult, and she was very nice when I talked to her. I really enjoy interviewing media professionals because they are just gonna be so much more. They understand how to give and take, and they're so much more empathetic with journalists.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got himself in hot water lately, but Bill Simmons is a really interesting interview. Like, you take something that he's like, and he's like a golden retriever puppy, like chasing a ball.
Really?
What do you think of the Patriots? What do you think of this Celtics game? And he just goes and goes and goes. So I always do enjoy talking to him. I like interviews where I genuinely learn something and I walk away and I'm like, I never knew that.
Right.
And it may not be nothing to do with what will end up in my story, nothing to do with what topic is, but I feel like I come away from it richer and more empowered.
Do you think it's because Bill Simmons is just more comfortable in his element? Is he more comfortable with the media because,
It is.
Yeah, so it's more of just a pure conversation with someone you're just having,
When they've been on the other side of it, it
Right.
really makes it so much easier.
Yeah. It's interesting. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I did a long sit-down interview with Louis Zamperini's daughter recently. He's the subject from Unbroken, which Angelina Jolie did the film on, and I literally just
He recently passed away, right?
Yeah, he passed away last July. So
right before the premiere.
His daughter did a profile on the family. I sat at their family home looking at photos, and I was there for like 4 hours, and she's just sharing every memory she had of her dad, every experience she had with Angelina and Brad when they were making the film up until the night her dad died. Showing me his USC cap from when he was like ran track in the 40s. And like, I think getting in someone's home and getting in their environment and looking around, and it's like not just what the words they say, it's very few opportunities do you have that, but that's when the real deep profiles come out.
Yeah.
That you get into their lives. You're not just getting sound bites.
Was the family happy with the portrayal in the film?
They were. They were happier.
That's got to be tough.
I didn't think the portrayal in the film was very good. I thought the book was amazing. But no, they were. But I saw her at the premiere and she was just crying her eyes out, and it was hard to see the story being retold.
Wow. Something, obviously, you're from England. You spent a lot of time in England. What's the biggest difference between the U.S. media, some of your peers, and the English media? Is there still a big difference, or?
I think they're getting closer together.
Okay.
Especially now there's a lot of websites that are international. Before it was like you had the British newspapers, you have the American newspapers. They didn't cross over as much. Mm-hmm. But now like you have the Guardian US-based website. You'll have CNN over in England. So just the way media become more digital and international in every way, so is the press.
Yeah.
The British newspaper has a bad reputation of just being tabloid and more fantastical and a bit just more brutal.
Right.
You'll never get a tougher boss than an English news editor. Like they're shouting and screaming and there's drama and it's just like an English newsroom is just a war zone.
Wow.
Whereas I think the American is just a bit more politically correct and a bit softer.
Is there a show, by the way, English Newsroom? Is there a show about our newsroom here that's on HBO? Is there a show in England?
You probably have the HBO version.
Really?
Yeah.
English Newsroom.
I haven't lived there for 10 years, so I don't know what's on TV, to be honest.
You may want to get writing on that. That would be an interesting.
Show. So I'll check it out.
Yeah, the English Newsroom. I'd love to see it. Drama, screaming, yelling.
I used to have a boss at a British news site that was based in New York and LA as well. He would only swear and really lose it with the British reporters because he knew they wouldn't sue.
Really?
And he had a different attitude with the American ones.
So are we seen as softer here? Not as even some of like our AP style is a little bit different than the styles of writing over there. How was the transition for you? Did you find yourself writing it with a different style here?
I moved over here 2 days after I finished my graduate degree.
Okay.
So I worked as an intern in England, but I never worked professionally there.
Okay.
So the style is definitely different. The language is different. To me, I feel like I'm professionally educated American-wise. So
right.
Um,
So if you went back to England though, and you had this English boss, would he just absolutely hate your nasty American way of writing?
I don't know. There would be a bit of a transition.
I always find it funny because I have friends that'll say like, "Oh, I've got a very good command of the King's English," and I'm like, "Listen, if you went over to England, they would put you in a guillotine because you're not speaking the King's English."
I mean, even the spelling's different. I used to work in an international office, so there was English, Australians, Americans, and we'd always call out, "Is this English or American?"
Right.
I'm like, I don't know. I'm familiar with both.
Yeah, I was part of a couple of joint commands when I was in the Marines, and I went to a few joint schools and trained with a few Royal Marines as well as some Canadian Air Force officers. And our fun thing was always defense. You know, defense spelt 4 or 5. Yeah, that was always the fun thing. So if you're picking up, and for me, I'll have multiple websites open to get my news from. BBC, in my opinion, is if you're not looking at BBC website to get a unique opinion on international affairs, but also domestic affairs, I really like the way BBC reports on domestic U.S. affairs. I then like to compare that to other websites as well. Far left, far right, in the middle, everywhere in between. What websites are you frequenting to get your information today?
I definitely go to the BBC a lot, and when I can, I listen to the BBC World News on Sirius or watch it on TV because I just think it's so international. Like, I feel like when I watch American news a lot, I get American versions of the news. I mean, even when I first moved here and was watching the Olympics, I'm like, how is the rest of the world doing?
Yeah.
Like, I get where the Americans are.
Right.
I go to The Guardian a lot.
The Guardian, okay.
That was a newspaper I read a lot when I was at university, and now they've done a really good job of doing a crossover with a lot of British news and a lot of American-based news as well. I mean, and a lot of the websites I go to, I have to for work that I wouldn't necessarily go to if I was just doing it for my own personal pleasure.
Right.
So I have to do CNN, I have to do ABC, New York Times, LA Times, obviously Hollywood Reporter and Variety and The Wrap. I spend a lot of time on SportsCenter and ESPN. So yeah, I mean, across the board.
Yeah.
You have to read the tabloids with the hard news.
Right. I agree. Something not to go back to BBC, but to go back to the BBC website. When you go to the sports tab, I always like clicking on sports tab because if you look at U.S. sports tab, it leads right up with baseball, football. BBC, sometimes you'll get Formula One racing, cricket, what we call soccer, or obviously you guys call football. And that's interesting to me because it shows you sort of where their readers go to first, sports that here aren't as popular. However, I have seen, even in the last 5 years, soccer, football, but soccer in this country making a huge push. And obviously we've got, I think, a population in this country right now, whether you're U.S. born or you're here from another country, you're a little bit more intimately aware and involved in soccer. And MLS is obviously seeing a huge surge right now in the U.S. What are you seeing from a soccer, football perspective in the U.S.? Does it have a good future, bright future? Are you seeing some growth?
Especially after the World Cup last year, and MLS is finally getting on its feet and getting a bit bigger. But I mean, the domination, especially in sports media, is the Premiership. It doesn't matter if the games aren't played here, the teams are the best of the best.
Right.
Like, no matter if you're a fan of a sport, you want to see the best people play it rather than like the third tier play it, which is why MLS is just not really going to take off until they get those premier players.
Right.
I'm having a lot of American fans now, especially now the games are on NBC Sports every Sunday morning. It's so accessible. You may have to get up early in LA. You may have to get up at like 6 in the morning to watch it, but people are doing it.
Right.
And if not, you just TiVo it and you avoid seeing the score for a few hours. So
yeah.
some of my closest American friends who I've watched American football with for years, and now like, did you see the Man United match? Did you see what Chelsea did? And telling me how my hometown team is doing.
That's gotta be funny. Well, that's also interesting, I think, and that's why I was like talking with you. But so when you go back to England, because now the NFL has been there, they're putting more money behind it. It's pretty well received there. But this is something you've been smart to, for a long time. So do you feel like the authoritarian on NFL football when you go home and talk to your friends?
I definitely get quizzed by all the guys.
What's the feedback? They like it?
Yeah, they love it. The last time I went back, I went to a New England Patriots game in Wembley Stadium one week, and then the following week I went to see Manchester United in Manchester. And it was like the best of both worlds. Wow. And the games and the sports are just so different, and the fan bases are. But even my mum will call me up and she'll ask me tomorrow. She's like, "What's going on with Tom Brady? What did he do?" She gets it.
Right.
English people are sports fans at heart, and even if they don't really understand all the rules or they don't know all the teams that well, they love the passion, they love the competition. They'll stay up till 5 a.m. and watch the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
NFL's on Sky now. We've got 4 games this year at Wembley. People are getting into it.
Yeah.
I mean, the world is just getting a smaller and smaller place. So it's not just like, this is big in this country, this is big here. Like, everybody, Twitter is international. The internet is international. So is news and so is sport, thank God.
Yeah. Something you report on is sports business. And so it's interesting for me to see how companies are able to engage like Premier League soccer teams, and sponsorship is a little bit different. What's the understanding there in terms of how businesses, corporate brands, endorsements that are used to endorsing players of football or soccer? There's a difference. There's a difference between the way American brands are able to incorporate themselves in an NFL game, vice how brands perhaps in the UK are able to integrate themselves into a soccer match or a football match. How are we going to sort of bridge the gap? How do you see that playing out from? I
don't know if the gap will be bridged. I mean, because the two sports are very different.
Right.
So if you have an NFL game, you've got commercials like every few minutes. You've got timeouts. You've got advertising money coming through there, even if it's not coming directly through the team. But, in an English football game, you've got 45 minutes of nonstop action with no break when you're only looking at the players, when you're only looking at, like, the sidelines of the pitch. So that's where the advertising comes from.
Right.
You have it on the jerseys. You have it, like, flashing up around Old Trafford because you don't have a commercial break for, like, 45 minutes. Yeah. And then you've got, like, 10 minutes, and then you're back on the field again.
Yeah. Interesting. And pardon my ignorance, but do the soccer clubs in England, do they make as much of an effort to engage the female demographic as the NFL has put a huge push on trying to connect with the female demographic here? They do not over there.
We have no pink bedazzled jerseys. There's no fluffy little caps. I mean, there's female fans, but it's definitely a harsher territory.
Right.
I had a great interview with Rebecca Lowe, who's one of the hosts of NBC Sports now. And she moved over from England to Connecticut. And she's like, the attitude she has from fans in America is very different to what it was in England. Especially when she first started out. She was one of the first female faces of football. Like, she got spat at. She got, like, coins thrown at her. She got sworn at. And she's like, she was just, like, in the trenches.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. I mean, football is still a man's sport in England. And girls don't play it in school. Like, we played hockey, and field hockey, not ice hockey, when I was in school. We never played football.
Not to go back to Deflate-gate, but have there been any recent scandals in UK football or soccer that kind of rival the whole Brady suspension? I mean, it was a big suspension.
Not that I'm aware of. Again, I haven't lived there for so long that I'm not in the day-to-day newsreel of England. I haven't even been back there for 2 years, so. I think, the last thing was the World Cup, which wasn't England, but, with the biting.
Right.
Suarez. I mean, that's the last big football scandal there was to this level.
Yeah.
That's just like disruptive hooligan behavior on the field as opposed to something that could have been like pre-planned.
Right, for sure. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this whole Deflate-gate plays out. It sets an interesting precedent. I mean, no one's off limits. They can basically suspend and fine anyone they want to. And I don't know if this suspension would have happened 10 years ago when, Brady first started playing. I think this is a different, unique, and interesting environment right now.
Yeah, it's very troubling.
Yeah, troubling.
Me as a Patriots fan and being involved in the media so much, I am really happy to be going to England on Thursday and being in a country that doesn't have SportsCenter and ESPN 24/7.
Be able
just a little bit of a break
to remove yourself. Well, I hope people check out the article. Where can they? How can they contact you and follow you on Twitter?
Well, the article's on The Wrap, which is just thewrap.com, and I'm The Wrap on Twitter, or I'm Deb Emery on Twitter. So
very cool. Well, I know you have a plane to catch, so we will let you go. But thank you so much for joining us. I'd love to have you back at some point.
Great.
Yeah.
It's always just a blast talking to you.
Yeah, for sure. So safe travels. Have a great day.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you for listening to the Centurion 360 podcast. Follow us on Twitter @Centurion360. Until the next episode.